Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to episode 13 of the 14th season of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown, and this is the only weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. Okay, before we take a look at social media, yesterday saw the release of a new mix of American Girl. Obviously, we're in the 50th anniversary year of the debut album, and the song features basically what was faded out on the original record. So I'm always of the opinion that I want to hear these types of releases. You know, I did see a few negative comments along the lines of that it's a money grab or no thanks, etc. But I always think if you're a fan of a band, wouldn't you want to always hear outtakes, edited stuff, you know, different takes of things, you know, like all the stuff we got on Wildflowers. I don't really remember anyone complaining about that, so I don't really understand why people are complaining about this. This is the stuff that I love to hear. My favourite band, Queen, released a fantastic remix of their sensational second album this year, and the deluxe edition is stuffed full of alternate takes, studio chatter, you know, all the stuff that we want to hear as fans. And, you know, what happens after fade out is quite often very interesting. How soon do you make the decision to move that volume faded down? What do you cut out? And I think I've probably said on the podcast before that I'm not always a fan of a fade out. Most of my favourite songs, you know, have very definite endings, but I'd definitely say that I think they made the right decision to fade out on American Girl. You know, it's Mike's famous rapid-fire finger-picking section that we fade out on the original track. And I found it so funny in a video on his Facebook page from 2021 when he said that he didn't think much of it, but everyone else loved it. As the new mix got to that outro, I was excited to hear what else might be in there, but it turns out it's just that same part repeated until the end, and then we get the actual ending with Stan bringing it home, and then, you know, there's some chatter from Tom in the background that's a little bit indistinct. So, because there really isn't any development of that off-the-cuff lick that Mike plays, I think fading on it and keeping the song at 3.5 minutes was a good decision. It would be kind of cool, though, to see that single released on vinyl, you know, with maybe the original mix as the B-side, so that we have a new physical release to be, you know, make it a worthwhile purchase. Okay, let's take a look at social media to see what you all had to say about last week's song, This Old Town. Over on Instagram, Lisa Kelly Pennington guessed my rating correctly this week and is now 7 and 3 for the season. She says, I think the themes in this song are helpful. It's been a rough semester and beaten down is exactly how I feel. It's definitely like someone spiked my drink and I can't think. And while it got better, I was somewhere I didn't want to be for a while. The man has a song for everything. Well, Lisa, I'm happy to hear. I think I heard that you're doing a little bit better. You know, just keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep moving forward, even if it's slowly. And yeah, I mean, Tom, a song for everything. That's a great way to put it. It really does. At That's Lucky, or That's _ Lucky, who I think may be commenting for the first time. So thanks so much in advance. That's Lucky. They write an amazing song. The whole album is great. Like you said, the dot coming out kind of put it behind to the newcomers to Tom's wonderful writing. It'd be interesting to talk to Mike or Benmont about this period to see what their recollections of how much the 30th anniversary tour and the documentary diverted attention away from the Highway Companion, you know, promotion cycle, wouldn't it? And look, I do get asked this now and again, but I am still hoping to talk to both of them at some point. But I also know that they are incredibly busy, and they, you know, if they're going to be on a podcast or they're going to be on a show or whatever it might be, they do sort of have to spend their time talking to shows and podcasts that will actually attract significant press for, you know, whatever they happen to be promoting. But you never know. Maybe I can get a half hour here or there to chat to one of them one day. On Facebook, Rich Gibson commented, great that you have your page back, Kev, and really enjoyed the episode. Thanks as always, Rich. The song is great and a 7 is about right, maybe pushing 8 even. Nice lazy groove and well-observed cousin of You Don't Know. A few of the lines you highlighted are top draw poetry, as you say. So yeah, thanks again, Rich. Hope you're doing well, mate. We got some pretty great lyrics to talk about in this week's episode too, don't we? So I'm looking forward to getting into that. But before we do, the wonderful Dallas Ellica commented, rats to kill, contracts to fill. Is this guy an exterminator or a mob hitman? The original lyric was cats to kill, contracts to fill. That's entirely different imagery. If it's an exterminator killing cats, that's a rough gig. If a contract killer is killing cats instead of rats, that's a different meaning. Rats in their eyes deserve it because they snitched. Cats has a more random nature. It's more nonchalant, without remorse. Left a note, couldn't read what he wrote. This sounds like a drunk, tragic end. I've heard the song 1,000 times, can't say I know exactly what it's about, but it certainly conveys a mood. There are lots of layers to this song. And yeah, dude, I didn't even think of the mob angle. When you say it, it makes a ton of sense, doesn't it? And I commented on Dallas's post on Facebook because, as Dallas says, you can hear a song like this 1,000 times and still not be completely sure what it means. I mean, go listen to Highway 61 Revisited by Dylan and tell me what the heck he's talking about in that song. It doesn't really matter because the song and this song are really compelling, even if their narrative is still opaque in a few places. Chris Nestoridis is a big fan, saying it's right up there with the best 2 or 3 tracks from the album. Everything about this song is masterful. Yeah, dude, that's strong praise, and subjectively, I obviously can't argue with you. It doesn't crack my top 5 from Highway Companion, but that's only because there are 5 other songs that I just happen to absolutely adore on this record, and it'll be interesting to see what my co-host John Paulson makes of this one when we record our album wrap episode. So finishing up your comments, co-executive producer Paul Roberts says, great episode, Kev. Thanks, Paul. Keep them coming. A really nice tune. However, if it was any more laid back, it would be horizontal. A pretty decent 8. And the R in pretty, as he wrote it, is bracketed because Paul is a very clever boy. And yeah, it's most definitely laid back to the extreme, but I think that's one of the things that gives it bags of charm, isn't it? Yeah, dude, Paul, thanks for the support as always. It's genuinely and always appreciated. Okay, well, that wraps up your feedback for the week. So let's roll down our socks and get ready to wallow about in the ankle deep. In Conversations with Tom Petty, author Paul Zollo asks Tom about a song titled Ankle Deep in Love. So maybe that was the working title before it was pared back to just the 2 words. Tom says, it's a story about a daughter that steals her dad's prize racehorse, and it's got a little bit of humour in it. So let's talk about the lyrics to this one first. Tom goes on to say, you don't have a lot of room to write a story in a song, so you have to be economical with your lines. And we've remarked on that on so many occasions with Tom's story songs, haven't we? He usually gives us these brief flashes of narrative before either zooming out, changing the POV, or switching to a character's thoughts rather than their actions. This one is a pretty tight, compact 3-act play, though, and Tom's economy works really, really well. Act 1, well, they raised that horse to be a jumper. He was owned by a Midwest Bible thumper. His preacher was a Louisiana drummer, took all winter to get through the summer. And if we go back to the discussion we had about specifics, the Midwest Bible thumper gives that, that type of religious zealot a very specific flavor, doesn't it? This is all stage setting and establishing shots in this verse until the last line, which has Tom's trademark wry wit to it. And we get that type of line in all 3 verses to punctuate the end of the act. Took all winter to get through the summer. Wonderful line. Act 2, the field hand hit the switch and stumbled. Outside, the big engine roared and rumbled. The stolen horse spooked and tumbled. She didn't speak for a week, just kind of mumbled. So now we have the 2 protagonists steal the horse, but it's not a perfectly executed crime, and the young lady is probably thrown from the horse and maybe hits her head. And that last line is gloriously darkly comic. She didn't speak for a week, just kind of mumbled. There's a real lack of compassion in the delivery of that line from the narrator that I find really, really quite funny. Act 3, he was caught up in a lie he half believed, found her hiding high in the family tree, washed his hands and put her across his knee. She said, Daddy, you've been a mother to me. So the daughter, and presumably the horse, have been recovered from the field hand, and discipline is forthcoming. When Paul Zollo asks Tom about that last line, he says, yeah, that was a good way to tie it up. I don't know where it came from. That just came into my head, and I followed the story to see where it would go. And I was listening to a fantastic live stream that previous and future returning guest, Ivan Anderson of Cyber Attack, hosted recently on his YouTube channel. And I was asking him what songwriting pitfalls he sees people falling into. And one of the things he said was when people use, tired old cliches. He talked about the fact that really good songwriters use phrases that sound like they might be old sayings or cliches or, bits of dime store wisdom. And Daddy, you being a mother to me, it has that sort of archaic vibe to it. You can almost feel it being something that was written at the turn of the 20th century, for a Southern Belle character in a Gone with the Wind style play. And it's interesting too that it's Daddy, but it's mother, not mama or mommy. There's a strange formality to the second half of that line that almost makes you think the daughter is just trying to butter up her dad to avoid punishment. And again, found her hiding in the family tree is a great line and one that Tom tells Paul Zollo that he was particularly fond of. Now, as with the vast majority of Tom's narrative songs, though, we don't actually get closure. We don't know what happens to the farmhand, and we don't know if he and the daughter ever realised their unrequited and ill-fated love. And what of the horse? Did he race? Did he jump? All the setup is there, and enough of the story to allow our imaginations to kick in and go wild. Then there's the chorus. Such a brilliant Petty or even Dylan-esque turn of phrase. Not up to your neck in love, not head over heels in love, ankle deep. That's pretty shallow, as young love often is. It can feel profound and intense and yet just be a passing infatuation in the grand scheme of things. So adding that little line in as the chorus just caps off the entire lyric perfectly. The song starts off with an unmistakably Jeff Lynne cavalcade of guitars. This one, as well as one of the bonus tracks that was released later on the 2007 special edition, sound like they could be very easily dropped into the Great Wide Open, and you wouldn't think them out of place at all. There's an acoustic or probably two acoustic guitars underneath, and then a 12-string electric guitar playing those very jangly chords over top. I would say it's probably a couple of acoustics at least, and God knows with Jeff Lynne, it could be 17, it could be a lot of guitar in there, you just don't know. The bass adds that double note pulse as the drums kick in, and after a very brief 4-bar intro, we're into that first scene-setting verse, with Tom using that laconic southern croon to ease us into this yarn of love and woe that he's going to spin out for us. The drums too have that real Full Moon Fever, Into the Great Wide Open sound to them that not all of this album does. I think we've talked about this before, that it's the least Jeff Lynne sounding of the Jeff Lynne albums. It's a baggy sounding snare. The hats are still kind of tick-tick crisp, and they're playing eighth notes with a shaker added in over top as an extra percussive note. It's also an easy, straightforward chord progression in what my pal Randy calls the people's key of C major. Not always the most, intuitive or popular key to play in on guitar, but watching the brilliant Tim Bullman's YouTube tutorial on his Judge Timbers channel, it doesn't sound like there's a capo at all on this. Those open strings really ring out beautifully as if they are just natural. So the chords are C, G, C on the first line, F back to C on the second, F to A minor on the third, and then G back to C on the fourth. And you'll find those chords in about 1.5 million songs, I would say, through the ages, and there's a reason for that. They feel good. That sixth chord, the A minor, instead of the root, gives you that very slight 2-bar tension at the end of that vocal line before we go back to the major fifth, and then to the root. Through this first verse, the guitars are pulled back to what sounds like just a couple of 6-string acoustics. There's lots of space in the mix here that is then intensified as the keyboard part comes in and gives this second verse more depth and a little bit more warmth. It's not doing anything fussy, just playing the chords on the first beat of the bar. And I think this might just be a trick in my brain, but it almost also sounds like there's a piano playing eighth notes. But I don't think it is there. And if it is there, it's mixed really, really back, really, really low. At the end of this second verse, that intro little riff comes back in on the big jangly electric guitar, and it acts as a turnaround into the chorus. The chorus itself pushes into the minor key, A minor and E minor, so the sixth and the third of C major. This is a very dramatic shift. The piano moves an octave lower, and those long bass piano strings really come through. After that first refrain of Ankle Deep in Love, we then hear that heavily affected guitar lick that has an almost alien quality to it that stands out in sharp contrast to everything else in the song. Then we move into Mike Campbell's solo. And sometimes Mike's solos remind me of other bands. I've talked about sometimes he reminds me of George Harrison. On occasion he'll use the Berry bends. He sort of does lean into his influences. But the more I listen to this one, who it reminds me of? It reminds me of Dr. Hook. And I don't know if there are any other people out there who listen to Dr. Hook. They're a little bit older now, so I don't certainly none of my younger listeners, of which I have many, obviously. There's no younger listeners to this podcast. But yeah, Dr. Hook. So there's something about that descending lick he plays to end the solo section that feels like a part coming from George Cummings back in the late 60s, early 70s. The tone also has a very slightly hard metallic edge to it. Not as hard as some of the very garage rock tones we'll hear on Hypnotic Eye, but certainly just with a tiny bit of punk attitude over the country-style lead part that he's actually playing. The solo then ends with that intro lick turnaround back into the chorus. Okay, folks, it's time for your petty trivia. Your question from last week was this: What is the most common street name in the United States? Is it A, First Street, B, Second Street, C, Main Street, or D, Church Street? Okay, well here, I'll give you the top 10 street names and the number of occurrences because there has to be at least one or two other nerds out there who will find this interesting. And for the nerds, these data are pulled from OpenStreetMaps, which is sort of aggregated from multiple different sources and tends to be considered the most authoritative list of streets in the US or in any country for that matter. And they are correct as of November 9th, 2025. So it might have changed by one or two, but I don't think the places will have changed. So at number 10, Maple Street at just over 4,600. At Church Street, a little bit more over 4,600. Pine Street, almost 5,000. Elm Street, really almost 5,000. And 4th Street at 5,216. Your top 5 are Oak Street at 5,500 almost exactly. 3rd Street, 6,149. 1st Street at 6,180. 2nd Street at 6,900 even. Meaning number 1 is Main Street at 9,316. So it was interesting to me when I saw these numbers that so many streets are commonly named after tree species. I suppose it sort of makes sense when you line streets with trees, what the French call the avenue, right? But I also find it really curious that you go with a numbered street system, but then more frequently use Main Street instead of First Street. So I wonder if that's just maybe because it's the main drag, it's Main Street, and colloquially, that being what it's referred to, they just figured, you know what, it'll be easier to just change the signage because everyone calls it Main Street anyway. Let's just call it Main Street. All right, your question for this week is this. In the Mudcrutch cover of 6 Days on the Road, which place is not name-checked? Is it A, Georgia, B, Pittsburgh, C, Denver, or D, the Eastern Seaboard? Okay, back to the song. Coming out of the solo, we get that turnaround, as I said, and we go back into the chorus rather than the last verse. In this last verse, that piano is joined by organ and the guitars are stacked back up to really give us presence through this third act. It's a really rich, full Jeff Lynne special that we get here as Tom paints the portrait of the daughter's interaction with her daddy. This last verse has real musical and lyrical weight to it. The song then transitions with that floor tom boom back to the chorus, and it's interesting that they didn't add a harmony vocal to this last B section. Ordinarily, you'd be expecting that, but I like the idea that being ankle deep in love is a superficial infatuation. It's not deep, and so we leave that vocal on its own. We won't let it be married to another voice. That big crash cymbal is brought up slightly in the mix here too on the first beat of each fourth bar. The chorus is repeated twice here before we have a nice syncopated tom fill between the beats to lead us into that intro riff to finish. And I really like that the last chord is on the fourth beat of that last bar. The snare is taken out there, and so we end up with the kick drum on the first, third, and fourth beats instead of just the first and third. So kick, crash, cymbal, bass, electric, acoustic guitars, all on that fourth beat. And often you'd be tempted to play that last note on the one of the last bar or an extra bar, but that hard stop on 4 draws a very final, definite line under the end of the song. Musically, this one is very, very simple. Again, I mean, it's got stacked up guitars as we expect from Jeff Lynne, and a couple of small adornments with that lovely intro lick, then some booming toms and that strange flangey alien guitar accent in the chorus. You know, there isn't a big grand bridge section or a moment that knocks your socks clean off, but every note is carefully placed and lined up with every other note. So it's one of those perfect, unfussy musical arrangements that Tom, Jeff, and Mike got so right on the other 2 albums Jeff worked on with the band or with Tom. It's no surprise really though that this one wasn't played live by the band, but as with last week's song, it's another one that you could easily hear being played at an unplugged type performance with Scott, Tom and Mike all sitting around with acoustics and Steve Ferroni using brushes instead of sticks as Benmont adds colour on a beautiful big grand piano. And the more I talk about this never performed MTV Unplugged, the more I wish it had actually happened. Okay, Pettyheads, that's it for this week. Ankle Deep is a really solid deep cut album track. I think that its musical simplicity is elevated by one of Tom's lyrical hidden gems. Tom has fun with the lyric, but effortlessly gives us this dark comedy over 3 economically constructive verses and that pithy little chorus line. It's another song that features a gorgeously tasteful Mike Campbell guitar solo and a wonderfully restrained character vocal performance from Tom. The other thing about this track is it's a real earworm. I find myself humming that intro lick quite often, and so I struggled a little with my rating on this one, but Ankle Deep is, at the end, I'm going to go with a 7 out of 10. The Tom Petty Project is a proud member of the Boneless Podcasting Network, which is a loose collective of podcasting friends and acquaintances brought together and championed by the inimitable Chaz Charles. Go check out the roster of podcasts by clicking on the link in the episode notes. You can also check out my other shows, Seaside Pod Review, a Queen podcast that I co-host with my very, very best pal Randy, who performs all the music in this podcast. You can also check out the Ultimate Catalog Clash that I co-host with my great pal Corey Morissette. This week, we kicked off Season 9 proper with Side A of Listen Like Thieves by the Australian band In Excess. Go check that out. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at The Tom Petty Project, and on Blue Sky at Tom Petty Project. Go follow, like, subscribe as applicable, and again, please leave a review or a rating if you haven't already. Keep talking to me on social media, and I'll keep reading out your comments on the show. And as your weekly reminder, the Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty Estate in any way. So when you're looking for Tom's music, go to a local independent record seller, go spend some money in a local store, give your money to local business, and get yourself some actual physical media that will never be taken down from streaming platforms. If you're going to go to streaming platforms, go to the official ones. If you want official merchandise, go to store.tompetty.com. And if you're looking for merchandise for this show, please go to store.tompettyproject.com. Don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and Tom Petty Fans Forever groups on Facebook. And make sure you're listening to Tom Petty Radio on Channel 31 on Sirius XM. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to discuss the final track from Tom's final solo album, The Golden Rose. Bye-bye.